There's so many different names for facelifts, and people go online, they get very confused by this. And just to try to demystify that whole topic, I just wanted to address that from a surgeon standpoint. There are different technical types of facelifts that are described, and those are usually more from the surgeon standpoint in terms of how we manipulate the tissue, how we dissect and what planes we're in, and how we're going to manipulate and fixate the tissue. And so those are very distinct types of facelifts that are probably the most important as far as differentiating them. Typically, we're working with a layer of connective tissue in the face called the SMAS layer. It stands for Superficial Musculoaponeurotic System. And this was something that some doctors gave it that name back in the 70s when they kind of discovered that they could put suture into that and actually move the tissue and secure it into position with that. And that kind of invests the fat compartments in the face. And by manipulating that, you can shift some of the volume of the fat back up into a higher position in the face. So that's a very important concept, because prior to that, just lifting skin and stretching skin and removing skin was not something that really gave a great result, because you're stretching, distorting, the tension on the incision would cause the scar to stretch, and it just really didn't hold up because you weren't actually addressing the tissues underneath in a way that would hold them into position. So working with the SMAS layer is of primary importance first off the bat. Now there's different ways to work with the SMAS layer. There's folding it on itself and lifting it up into a higher position and securing it. There's removing a strip of it and sewing it together again. There's lifting it from a higher position up higher and dissecting down. And then there's this, one of the newer techniques is called the deep plane technique. And it's actually not a new technique. It was something that was proposed back in the 1980s by a plastic surgeon named Sam Hamra in Texas. But when he first came up with this idea, a lot of surgeons tried to do that, and the results were quite varied because it can be a very powerful lift. One of the most important things that differentiates the deep plane facelift from a SMAS plication facelift is that you are releasing some ligaments that are holding that SMAS in place. And those ligaments are approximately in this region of the face right here. There's also some back here and down along the neck as well, and one under the chin here. So these different ligaments help to fixate the SMAS in those positions. And if you release that, you're able to mobilize the SMAS further. However, we're also going below the SMAS, and we're going into a plane that is just above where the facial nerves reside. So it is technically a more difficult and a little bit riskier operation from that standpoint, but the benefits are that you're not putting a lot of tension on the tissues. You're basically releasing them and letting them move and then reattaching them down into that position. So that's the deep plane facelift. And so my feeling is, does everybody need a deep plane facelift? Or I should say, my question is, does everybody need a deep plane facelift? Well, I think that there's certain advantages to it. There's also some risks with it. So I'm not sure that everybody needs one, but I think when there's a looseness between the ligament, the zygomatic ligament right here, and the midface, it can help to pull some of that laxity forward. Another way of dealing with that laxity, if it's just a little bit though, if it seems like it's loss of volume in there, is to re-expand that volume by fat grafting. And a lot of times that's done even with a deep plane facelift to add volume back in, because there is some loss of volume in certain areas. And so getting the right shape is not just a matter of flattening out the tissue and pulling it up in a certain direction and taking the slack out of it. It also has to have a three-dimensional shape as well. So that can be an important aspect of either type of facelift, to add volume back in. That can give you, it can restore some of the fullness in an area where there's a little bit of laxity and give the shape back that you need. And so in cases like that, I think some people are perfectly fine having a SMAS plication facelift. SMAS plication facelifts are safer from the standpoint that they don't get close to the nerves, but they are a little bit limited in how far you can mobilize the tissue. Surgeons are referring to this part of the SMAS as being the fixed SMAS and this being the mobile SMAS. But there is some mobility out here as well, and there is an ability to shift some of that as well. So it's just different techniques. Now, what are all the other types of facelifts that are out there? So there are many, 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 many names of facelifts that you'll see online, and really what they are surgeons kind of trying to make it sound as if it's a proprietary procedure. And to some degree it is, because there are all kinds of little techniques that are incorporated into those categories of facelifts that help to get little tweaks and changes to the tissue. And each surgeon has kind of learned from experience how to do that and how to manipulate the tissue. So what one surgeon does that they call a smash plication facelift or a deep plane facelift may be getting a different result from what somebody else has, because they're adding additional steps into there that they've learned, or even just the degree of mobility of the tissues and how they've moved those tissues based on their experience and based on their aesthetic eye. So just because it has a certain name to the procedure, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a different category of facelift, but the experience of the surgeon in his hands with that technique can get a different result from what a lot of other surgeons are getting, because of the way that he's doing every little step of the procedure. And that can translate into the way that the scars look, if he puts too much tension on the skin or doesn't trim the skin properly, with the way the earlobe may be stretched out of position if it's not carefully addressed and secured where there's not tension pulling on it. Just different features that make something look natural versus unnatural. Even, especially a deep plane facelift, it has the ability to mobilize the tissue much more powerfully. And so if a surgeon pulls it in the wrong direction or pulls it too far, you can get a very unnatural looking result even with a deep plane facelift. And so it's just because you're doing a certain technique doesn't really translate into the same outcome. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any more questions or you want to make an appointment for a consultation, please feel free to contact us at newportfaces.com. Call us or text us at 949-566-1032.